Hey, welcome to another inspiring episode of Strive 365, a podcast about how people can push through challenges and thrive every day, no matter the odds. We're here to help guide you to live a better life, whether it be mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And I am your host, Justin Arnold, in the amazing Rockbox studio. Today we're joined with a very special guest, Randy Spurling, owner and founder of On the Spot Cleaners, a successful entrepreneur and real estate investor, becoming a good friend of mine as well. And Randy's story is one of perseverance, determination, and commitment to putting people first. That's why I had to have him on here. He was a perfect fit for this show. He's built a thriving business while still prioritizing his family, his personal life, and he's here to share his insight on how to achieve a fulfilling and successful life. So, Randy.
Stop. Just stop. I'm like, I want to meet that guy. That sounds awesome.
I know, pretty cool dude.
Good intro. Good intro.
Why don't you introduce yourself? Tell them a little about yourself.
Randy Spurling. My wife and I have 5 children between us. I have 4 myself. The girls are 25, 20. Boys are 17 and 15. And her son is 15. We met when the children were going, the youngest boys were going to daycare, into kindergarten. It's great. My son's like, I want to play with that kid. I looked over, I'm like, please go get his mom's number for me. And that's kind of a funny story for us to tell, but we're coming up on our 10-year anniversary, 5-year wedding, and we have definitely worked together to build up a great life first, and also supporting that with some good businesses.
Yeah. So speaking of businesses, like, can you tell us a little bit about your journey and how you started?
For sure.
On Spot Cleaners and some of the things you're doing.
100%. I don't mind being very transparent, because sometimes you got to dig deep. When I started my first company, I just needed to pay the bills. I was 21 years old when I had my daughter, and decided to work as much as I could to put her mother through nursing school. And then when the time came that she was out of school and got a job, I really, at that point, was not interested in going to college, even though that was the original plan. Yeah. You go first, I go second. And I had a side hustle going because my brother was some carpet cleaning. And I really my mind was there. I was reading books already. Podcasts weren't really introduced yet. I think I still had a flip phone, so I wasn't like I was picking up anything off my phone. But I was reading a lot of books on real estate, business, and all kinds of stuff. So very quickly, I turned the cleaning company, it's 21 years now. So I turned On the Spot Cleaners into starting just as a carpet cleaning company, just to pay the bills. But I'm eager to learn stuff, and very ABCD. I went from carpet cleaning to responding to sewer cleanup in basements, wanting to get certified so I don't do it wrong. In that process, learning that if you do it wrong, there's mold. Getting certified so we don't do that wrong. Then we learn if you do that wrong, there's air quality issues. So we get certified and do that for duct cleaning. And my company grew very quickly, steadily, 2 or 3 trucks for a long time. What I didn't know was how to run a business, even though I did it well. Later on, I was using the profits to reinvest into real estate very early, like probably 15 years ago now. And what I did there was I read a lot of books, and I saw that real estate investors use systems. They use other people's money. They use property managers and staff. And every time they invest in those systems, their businesses could expand and scale. I didn't see that in the cleaning industry until I learned it in the real estate industry. Once I applied it over there, I always say that my 11th year in the cleaning restoration company was my 2nd year mindset, because I was just out there running 80 hours a week carrying the shovel. 11 years in, I start to realize I need to build the system and build the team and invest, and like I was doing in my own real estate. And then very quickly went from 3 trucks to 8 to 9, 10, and 11. I don't want to say I stopped at 11. We're now 21 years in, and we are at a point where I look at the growth on the horizon as I want to receive the growth. I'm not chasing growth in the business. The reason why is because I understand how much time it takes, and I don't want that time taken away from myself and my family.
Man, I love that, because you hear that, and there's so many people listening that struggle to even with business and then the personal, and it literally sounded like what I really also loved, and I'm sure the listeners and viewers loved, was you were, from the beginning, you wanted to do it right.
Right, man.
Like that quality over quantity. You wanted people in there. You didn't want to just do the work and make the money. You wanted like a quality product for people's health. It sounds like, because that's what you're doing. Like 100%. That's totally aligns with Strive 365, and I don't think people realize that. Like what. You might be getting a budget, you might be getting a price cut, this might be cheaper, but you really need to look into some of these things, because what you just said, I think about that, but I doubt the average person is thinking about the quality work, mold, breathing, and everything else. So how did you even think of that? Like,
I don't know. I think I have a very curious mind. And when I meet right now, we're developing a coaching consulting company. And one of the things I say is that you have to be very curious, and you also have to want to be a problem solver if you're going to be successful. And I was a problem solver. I'm like, okay, if this happens, what happens later? I don't want a phone call 3 years later that something's wrong, or 2 days later, or anything. So how do we avoid these problems so that we're successful? And honestly, you think that's a natural thought, but what it is you're in a training class and 3 months later you hear it differently, and it kind of recycles a thought in the back of your brain. You're like, aha, that's what it was. So I just made a lot of notes. And one of the things I say a lot is to document what you're thinking today, tomorrow, and 5 years from now, and look back at those notes, because you can really use those notes to either build your success plan, use those notes to build your scripts so you can answer the same question over and over and over efficiently. But by doing it well, I mean, when you were talking, the first thing I thought was, I wouldn't want to walk into Wegmans, see you, and be like, oh my gosh, I don't want to see him. I want you to come up to me and be like, hey, you cleaned for us. Awesome. Not like, you kind of cleaned for us and it sucked. You don't want that conversation.
You know what? That's a good point. What you just said is similar to how I thought. Like, I look at what are they going to say to their friends, and how is that going to impact you? And in my line of work, it's always like, I know I won't touch everyone in their lives, especially I'm always thinking children. Like, I want them to set the tone in their children's health. And it also, this is very correlated to health. When you put in the work early, you put all that upfront hard work, and then find it. You also said, while you're helping these people, you're also like, I don't want to have to come back 3 years later. So it's like a win-win-win all the way around. And if more people just thought about that, you'd give a better quality product. They'd be longer lasting. You'd get more referrals, but you're also helping people in a long way, and you're helping 100%. Yourself from the headaches, the less stress. 100%. And so there's the mental health.
I never have to look at my phone if it rings and wonder if I should answer. I'm not worried. I'll answer every single phone call, because there's not one coming in that I'm worried about, like, oh, I did them wrong. They're calling me again. It's not happening. It's not easy, right? There's definitely times when you have to pay to be in business and pay to finish a job. But that's on you to learn as a business owner or as an investor or a realtor. Excuse me, not a realtor, a real estate investor. You have to, sometimes those are learning curves you got to pay for, and that's education. And if you could pay for it 3 or 4 times, you're not learning very fast,
Yeah. It's funny. We don't always have people like yourself. I mean, this is a health podcast, so we're having nutritionists, doctors, that kind of stuff. But it's funny how curious problem solver, you said it, is a recurring theme on here. Yeah. And it's just be curious. We literally have had podcasts where we talked about just curious and solving problems. If you continue to do that, right? Yeah. And whether it be business, whether it be life, like if you're struggling with your marriage, be curious. Ask questions.
Oh, can I tell you something right now? This is fantastic. You just clicked the light bulb. This is why I don't like to read the notes ahead of time. I had, before I thought about building a consulting coaching business, I had a lot of people who'd call me, hey, I got a question. Hey, I got a question. And I liked that. And I liked helping. And one of these small business owners called me, I don't know, 3 years ago. And he says to me, he's like, my wife and I just getting married. We're planning children. I'm afraid because a lot of people in my generation are in and out of marriages so fast. What do you think it is? Now, he's asking me, I'm 10, 12 years older, so maybe he thinks, right? I have some experience. I do. So I said to him, I go, let me ask you this right away. If you're looking at real estate and if you're looking at business, what do? You read books, you read podcasts, you go to mentorship. When's the last time you picked up a book about communicating with your wife? And he about started crying. And I was like, don't make me cry. And I'm like, honestly, man, I'm like, when did you pick up anything about how to speak to children, raise children, meet with your mentor groups? I'm not a church guy. I don't do that. I was raised in foster care. It's not that I'm against the church. I never had the experience. But at the same time, I understand why people go through their church groups and their mentorship, or you have some sort of like group ahead of you that you should sit with because they have experience and they can guide you through that. So when I told him, I said, pick up a book on marriage, raising children, maybe the first 4 years of marriage, because you're there, And literally, it was a great conversation for us to have. And it was just a light bulb that clicked. I was like, you read about business, you read about real estate. When's the last time you read about your wife? Like how to speak with her and meet with her. Yeah,
and what you just said got me thinking of one of my favorite books, which I'll put out here because this is what this is about, like helping people out. So when we talk about marriage, health, kids. There's this author, I can't remember her name, but she wrote 2 great books. She probably has a couple others, but one is 13 Things Mentally Strong Parents Don't Do.
Wow.
So some negatives on there on purpose. And I don't want to give away her story, but then there's another one she wrote, 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do. And it's along the same things. She talks about her husband. She talks about her second husband, which I don't want to give too much away, but it's a really cool book for those that how'd you know that?
His fingers did the walking.
I was I've read it. I love it. You're right, Justin. No, but it's one of those ones. There's more I've read, but those 2 first come to mind because I loved them as a parent because it was a different approach to parenting, not the typical ones. And it was like, we're racking our brains, and the same thing. I chose to read those because it was very early on. And it was like running a business and things like that. And I'm like, I'm reading all these self-help books and personal development, always been about it. But it's like, have I ever? I asked myself that own question that you basically said. So I would totally encourage people because if you're wanting to improve in business, if you want to improve in health, and they all go well. If you're not doing anything about, if you have children, you're not doing anything about that. You're just letting it happen. If you're not doing anything about marriage, you're just letting it happen. I'm going to tell you this now, like they're all working for each other or against each other. If something's out of whack,
100%.
The rest will start to fall or break apart or won't be as efficient or as successful as it possibly can be. So
I think what I've found in my own conversations is that 20 years ago and today, the first 20 years, the first 5, 10 of those, you would have heard me talk about the opportunities and the profits and how to run those businesses and run those systems to create money. What I try to do now is skip over that pretty quickly because I find out that pretty much anybody can figure that out with the right tools. But I really incorporate a few things in our conversations, which are like, recently I wrote something on Facebook. I was like, listen, you got to protect your mental health. In business, you're going to lose money, you're going to lose friends, lose jobs, and sometimes it's your own fault. But you got to protect your mental health and you got to ask for help. And it can be very intimidating as a business owner to ask for help, as a person to ask for help.
As a man,
right? And I hate to say it because you got to be gentle. Listen, as a man, nobody wants to be weak. That's what they think it is, but it's not.
Help is strength, man.
Bro. So what
army do you know? What, like seriously. The Vikings, right?
Yeah,
like, no, I'm a man. They needed a team.
Seriously. So my whole thing is always like, listen, if you're intimidated by going to counseling, let's just quote unquote talk business. Because what we found is that in our conversations with business owners at coffee, most often time we walk away feeling like we were just in counseling because it's not really like, hey, what are your numbers? How many trucks do you have? Nobody gives a shit. What it ends up being is, this stresses me out. Have you had this problem? How do I do this well? This keeps me up at night. Or this is a challenge for my wife and I because I'm maybe in one direction in business and not so much at home. And so what a lot of people who follow us are like, oh, you guys go to coffee and breakfast all the time. And so we started opening up those invites because they really need to sit in on these. It's not just business and numbers,
Yeah, and you said, I just want to go back on something you just said. You said nobody gives a shit. And I would agree, but I also would add the people that do.
Sure.
Insecurity, right?
Yeah.
Or they have an area they want to work on. So it's easier to, ignore that which is inside and be like, oh, look at all his trucks or comparison, right? Yeah. So there's always something like that to be aware. So you talk about all these things. This is a good counter. How do you manage? Like, how do you manage doing all these things, wearing these hats professionally and being a husband, being a father, and then, of course, advice?
So I'm going to use business phrases only because that's how I speak. I time block.
I said be yourself when we came on here. This is you.
That's
me.
There you go. So I am that person. I time block. And something that I will give any listener some feedback on or some insight on at having 25-year-old down to 10-year-old, 15-year-olds, I have a lot of guilt in the beginning because I started the business and I ran. And I thought, gosh, I really missed out on a lot. And my 25-year-old now looks at me and she's like, Dad, I had a phenomenal childhood. Why? Because we still, even when we were busy, I made time for the fall rides at Bristol Mountain. I made time for 2 camping trips a year. And even though in my mind it wasn't enough, to the kids, it was plenty. So it isn't about like going to Disney every single month and that's enough. It's not that. It's just, so when I do now and I tell people, I time block, and you don't have to feel selfish or guilty when you say, literally Tuesday afternoons from 5 to 7 are for my kids. People are like, what are you talking about? That's kind of like odd. That sounds odd. Okay, sure, it sounds odd. Maybe
people say that? Oh.
Yeah, they'll say like it tastes funny. It's like a weird phrase, right? Because they're your kids, you shouldn't have to schedule time with them. Guess what? When you schedule time with them, I expect you to put your phone down. I expect you to actually spend those 2 hours with them. My sons and I do a lot of mountain biking. I can't really pedal more than 2 hours, so that's plenty of time.
Yeah,
but the memory in their head is that you're there for them, you know?
I'm with you. I do the same thing. I schedule. I learned early on just because one of the things I said, and this worked for me, this may not work for everybody, but I realized my number one job is dad, you know, personally, at least the time of my life. I was being told over and over again, and maybe this was the motivation. Oh, you're in the thick of it. Oh, you're like the ages of my kids. You're in the thick of it. So I realized, but I'm also in the thick of it of like business. So like, how do I manage this? Well, how do I manage my schedule? I schedule it. How do I manage my clients? How do I manage my phone calls? How do I manage, computer work? I put it all in the calendar. So then it just like made sense.
Yeah.
So I schedule my morning routine. Now I don't need to put it on the calendar, but like I slot out time for this, personal time, personal development, work time, and then, family time. If you're scheduling all the other priorities, it goes back to the book, right? If it's important, you prioritize it.
Yep.
So if your kids are important, your wife are important, if you're not prioritizing, you gotta be honest with yourself.
Yeah. Now, my wife needs more than 2 hours on a Tuesday, but still, we have a great time. Like yesterday, we usually schedule a date day for Tuesday during the day. Now, we're still going to run our phones and texts and emails because we're both active. But we walked 2 miles to a coffee shop for a late lunch at 2 o'clock, 2 miles back. And it was we had conversations that were unplanned, and they were great. They were great. One of the conversations were about like, do people react the way they react or the way they think they're supposed to react based on movies and TV? This was like a random thing we just popped off with.
I love it.
We're like, in movies, this is how people react, so maybe that's how they think they're supposed to react. And I said to her, I'm like, my belief for us personally is that in the last 3 or 4 years, we are much more mentally mature than we used to be. So we don't react right away anymore. We stop and assess and kind of hold on to thoughts for a minute. And that takes a lot because when you're in business or family, you think you got to have an answer right away. You think you got to respond right away. You don't. Just take a minute and digest it. But to answer something you said about how do we manage it all, the scheduling is a big deal. And then not feeling guilty for scheduling that time, like it's not enough. Because again, my kids have told me it was plenty.
Yeah.
And so that allows you to put more on your plate efficiently. But everybody has a limit. Everybody has a limit. And I would say that most business owners don't already schedule. They don't time block their own business. So it's a whole new concept for them to add family into that. But once they do, I think, you're also much more professional and efficient in your business, and then a better connection in your family. Yeah,
and it's just self-analyzation, right? Like if you realize that, like you just said, if you're not scheduling, start simple. Some people start way too much. And if you're not doing anything, it doesn't need to be every single day. Or say you missed out on like your 2 hour gap. I've had so when I was writing my last book, my first book, I could schedule it, but it took forever to write. I really was on a mission to get this done because I was so motivated that it was flowing. Yeah. And so I literally, outside my normal gym health in my other business, I scheduled time for my book, and I didn't put my kids in the schedule on purpose, and I let them know. I let everyone know. And then Friday would be our time. Sure. But that was hard for them, right? It was so hard because they had gotten so used to it. But I explained to them everything. But then I know they're not going to miss that because they look back and they talk about all the great times. And then we went to the museum and all these other great things. And it's like you said, so just let people know and just be okay. Don't beat yourself up. Like you said some really great stuff. So I just wanted to give some examples of where I've had to do that. But it makes sense. Like if you can't live by it every day or every week, but you got to put it in. You got to put it in.
I'm very positive. I'm a very forward positive thinker. And if you said, I can't do Tuesday for 2 hours, all you have to do is communicate the expectations with your kids or your business or whoever the hell, right?
Yeah.
So you say to your kids, guys, I'm sorry, I can't bike with you Tuesday. Here's why. It's okay because everyone needs to sort of understand that there's not one thing that is always the most important, and that's unfortunate. It's true. I have to go do this part for this business. That business supports us. Okay, XYZ.
You want to play hockey and lacrosse.
I gotta go make money, right? Like we're still gonna pay those bills. But it's explaining it and laying out the expectations, and then also just assigning like some responsibility. Like I take responsibility. I can't do this Tuesday with you, but here's why, and then we'll move forward. As opposed to just not showing up.
The overall message of that goes back to even the business. You invest a little upfront time to just having that conversation instead of like and this can I mean, I'm a big believer that right there, communication can cure a lot of like after the math. Like, why don't you spend enough time with me? And then the fight with the wife or the kids. It's like by just investing a few minutes or a few moments. Same thing with your work. Like by investing those years in education and just building that, like you had less headaches and less issues later on. It's crazy how the correlations with, if you guys are going to take anything away, hopefully you heard all that, because it's like upfront investments.
Upfront.
Right?
Yep. And then knowing to do it, just knowing to do it and not being afraid to have difficult conversations. There was a time when I had, not very long ago, like 5 years ago, I had bought a heating and cooling company, and I brought on a very, very good friend of mine to be a partner of that company because he had the knowledge. I had like the business side. Yeah. And within about a year and a half into that business, I had to like literally sit down with my wife and children and tell them, you can feel what's coming off of me. It's high level of stress. I'm like, it's not you. It's not you. It's not you. It's not you. I just need some time to work through this. And, so Tuesdays were out the window, whatever Tuesday is, right? And that was disappointing to me, but it was a motivator to me to build something to get back to my family time. But I just had explained to him, because if I'd gone another year of just like being cold and short and kind of irritating to them, it would affect the long-term relationship. Instead, I just told them, it's not you, it's me, but I need to work on this. Just give me some space. And there's a lot of lessons there, man. Like for the receivers, right? The children in the family sitting next to a business owner who has multiple hustles, to hear them say, I feel weak right now. It's not you. I need to work through it. It's not all like rainbows and sunshine, No,
it isn't. And man, this is something that we talk about regularly in our house too. And then the challenges, even just a small example that's just coming to my head was this past week, our daughter got to go to DC. And me and my wife were talking, and I was like, I bet a lot of these kids aren't going to be in school on Monday. Their parents are going to let them sleep in and everything else, which is fine. No judgment here, just facts. But our daughter, there wasn't a question. She didn't even ask, but he was like, you're going to go to school on Monday. Make sure you're ready. And she came back Monday really tired, but she said, nobody was really in school in my grade. And it's like, what does that tell you? Yeah. And we talked it out. It's along those lines. Like, not everything's going to be easy. She's going to show up even when you're tired. And that's just life. Like sometimes you just got to show up. You got to do the work even when you're tired. You may not be 100%. I wish I could be 100% for everything. Right.
There's, there's just not more than 100 though. That's what people don't understand. There's not more than 100%.
No.
You think so, you want it, but there's not. There's not. To go back a little bit on how do we do it all. You train, develop, and mentor great support staff. I have employees that work with me, not for me. Very, very particular about my language. Technicians, service staff, whatever they are, they work with me, not for me, because they're working with me towards a goal, right? The business has to be successful. And if we take care of our employees, they take care of the service calls and the customer takes care of our business, right? That's it.
Take care of your people. They take care of you. They take care of the others. I mean, that was going to be a question that I had on here was like, you mentioned choosing people over profit. How do you prioritize your team and customers? And why do you believe it's so important? So it's like, this is a question that I had and you're essentially asking it, but is there anything else like, how do you manage to prioritize all that? How do you manage to prioritize your team, your customers? You pretty much said why it's so important, but yeah.
Well, and the thing about people over profit, actually that line came from Valerio, who's been in here, and he and I actually own a company together as well as an investment.
Anthony's talking about, guys.
Sorry, guys. Anthony. So I have 4 Anthonys and
4 wins.
Yeah, I have 4 Anthonys and 4 Davids in my life, and I'm very fortunate. But I name them all with their last name.
Makes sense.
Yep.
It's like players on my teams.
Yeah, exactly. I was in the Army, so it's like Army stuff.
Yeah.
But you know what? He and I own a business together as an investment, and we enjoy running that one together. But when we sit down and we look at like what you do, I stole the line from him, people over profit. When he said it, I'm like, oh, I like it. And he knows when I like something because I'm like, hold on, stop talking. I put it in my phone notes and he's like, okay, you going to write that one down? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to use it. So, but it's a good way to explain how we already operate. And everything in your business is a long-term investment. And it's not an easy, don't get me wrong. Like 21 years, I own 2 companies myself and 1 partnership and other investments. I still have to question myself. Like when I buy another service truck and outfit it, it's $80-some thousand. And I have to ask myself, how long do I want to be in business? Well, probably 20 more years. So I guess this has to come, right? But it's still a question I ask myself. It's not like I just willy-nilly wake up successful every morning. It's a lot of like digesting. But people over profit is a concept of everything you do in your business is an investment. You invest in your people, you pay them well, you treat them well, they treat the customer right. Customer brings you all the success you need. It's just that way. It's just that simple.
So why is it so hard? Because you see companies that are investing in themselves, like the top dog, or looking at the profit and not in their people. So even large companies, but how do you get them to just see?
Gosh, I don't know, man.
Because you grew exponentially, you would say you contributed just like not really looking at the profit while you wanted to make it, for long sustainability and whatever else. You just always from the beginning took care of your customers, took care of your people, and then the profit just came.
See, that was like a natural,
simple.
That was like a natural path for me. It was natural to me. It's like, oh, that's how this is going to work. Now, people think we do it because we're looking for referrals and word of mouth. That's awesome, but we do 97 service calls a week. People don't talk that much. Like you have to advertise and market.
Especially now, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, you have to spend a lot of money in marketing, advertising, funnels, and all that stuff. To hit 100 service calls a week is not word of mouth. Do we get it? Absolutely. Would it ruin us? No. If we ignored people and did bad jobs, we'd still be successful. I only know that because I see companies that don't do a great job in any industry and they still make money.
Oh, yeah.
I just don't want to be that company.
Even in my industry.
I just don't want to be that guy. So it obviously helps us to do better because we do well. But I don't know the big corporations, they all have these greed policies or something maybe, but early on, it was very simple for me. And we've talked about this at lunch before. I was raised in foster care, then eventually to aunt and grandmother took us in. No blame to them, but no extra money, right? No new sneakers, no, 4 T-shirts in high school rotating through so nobody recognized the same shirt every week, right? Big deal. But those are the things at 47 years old I still remember.
Yeah.
So when you remember the fear of being poor and broke, you respect the responsibilities you get of being successful. Either you do or you don't. And so for me, fortunately, I never was like, oh, I made $1,000. I spent $1,050. I didn't. I always just consistently paid myself and looked at how much of that money should be reinvested to continue to grow. Now, I didn't think 21 years ago I was going to scale out to where I'm at today. I just knew that I didn't want to run out of money, and also that money needed to support the business. So when I say run out of money, I mean business first. I don't want to just spend all my profits because then what if I need a new truck and I can't get it? That's real stupid.
Yeah, and you kind of said it earlier, but I believe we're all a product of our environment. You talked about how you and your wife had a conversation about people and are they reacting to the movies. I've had these same conversations, same thoughts. I'm always like, are people, because people become robots. You are what you eventually, the environment you're around is what you become. So if you're consistently just watching shows and not exposing yourself to people, not having lunch like we are, having human conversations, you are what you see. In the neighborhoods, you see, when I moved to Rochester as a prime example of how I've never seen people drive, and I've lived in Chicago, I've lived in some big cities, I've lived in the South where insurance is high and driving is horrible. Yeah, I always make the joke, people are coming off tractors and then going into cars. But I came here and I'm like, and it didn't matter what neighborhood. I was like, man, the way people drive, there's things I've never seen in anywhere else that I see in Rochester. So just back on that, what in your environment, you talked about Army. I'd love to hear more about that because it's not something we've talked in depth. Does that, what in your life, childhood, you talked about foster care. So, I don't think people realize, I wrote a book on purpose through pain and the challenges and how it developed me, where some people fail to see that. So what challenges, what hardships, what things that you can share that potentially is why you are who you are today? Yeah,
I'd love to say that there was a few of those light bulb moments or experiences as a kid, but honestly, it's every day. It's every day, and you said it. It's who you're around. And then when you start to, so I'm big on documenting, and when I mean documenting, I don't mean just business stuff. I mean thoughts constantly. And then I am big on positivity. So I don't try to think anything negative. I'm afraid I'm going to bring it to light. So
makes sense. Yeah.
The reason I joined the Army was simple. I just wanted to get away.
Okay.
And I thought I was supposed to go to college and I knew I couldn't pay for it. So I was just I just want to get out of this. My aunt and grandmother, they did what they could, but they were very underprepared to be parents. And they just came from a very verbally abusive sort of generation. So I hated it, right?
I feel
Absolutely
that.
hated it.
Yeah, I
You know?
feel that.
So I just wanted to get away from there. And the Army was easy to me. Getting yelled at was like, well, at least they respect me. Like, at least they're showing us respect.
Well, and you talk about verbally abusive. It's a correlation. Oh, they must love me, right? Because you thought love was being verbally abusive. You associated.
So
these guys really love me. They're screaming and cussing at me.
But they said I did a good job.
Yeah, there you go. That's all I needed.
There's something new, right? You know, and it's funny because that builds into this level of acceptance, right? Like you want to be accepted, you want to grow, but what it leads you to is not being satisfied, right? Because you're just doing what you think from your early experiences are. So once you start to learn new experiences and then you see something that you connect with, you're like, oh, if I do this, this feels better. I can do more of that. And I know that sounds simple as can be, but that isn't like something clicked at 23 and I figured it all out. It's 23, 33, 43. And I'm looking forward to what I learned at 53 because it's next. You know what I mean? I already know what I don't know and I'm excited to learn it. It's just a pretty wild ride, to be honest with you. Like when I look back at some of my notes, I'm like, wow, I goaled out some of this, but I excelled at it, you know?
So, man, you talk about the past. So where do I want to, there's so much I can say right here about the past. So many people. Go ahead. No, it's such an interesting subject because you and I are both similar in that we use the past as a tool.
Right.
We revisit it. We're comfortable talking about it, where some people are stuck in it but don't realize it. Mm-hmm. Or they think they're trying to ignore it. They don't want to bring it up in their conscious mind, but they're really still in it because they haven't gotten through whatever their trouble is. So it's hard for them to move forward. And I think, that's where that's where history, of our own history, we struggle with whatever trauma or whatever we make up in our minds. So I really believe we can learn from that. And that's what you're talking about. Like I look back and before we started the show, we started talking about me being a weather acre. People don't realize I did weather for like 3 years. And at the time I thought it was so random. Like I thought, I was living in Kentucky prior to this.
It's pretty random to me, somebody who's a weather guy. That's okay. But
when you hear how the dots all connect, it makes sense. So I'll make this quick because we're here for you, man.
No, I don't care. No. This is back and forth.
But this is cool. Like, so I was living in Kentucky. I had graduated college, a 4-year degree, and I went into managing restaurants and things like that. I was living in Lexington, Kentucky, and I felt motivated. My parents cancer. My mom had a brain tumor. My dad was in remission from prostate. He had been fired from his job because he had to wear like a colostomy bag and all these things. And then he was able to sue and make a little bit. But the long story short is they were struggling. I had 2 older siblings, but I was the one that, if anything, I was single. I was doing nothing, and I honestly was looking for a way to get out of Kentucky, out of restaurants. I was working at I had like 3 jobs, by the way, that I did not need.
I'm not really surprised.
That's a whole other story. But it was growing up with parents who had 6 jobs and the scarcity mindset. I thought I had to have all these jobs, Sure. So I moved back home, and I've always wanted to work in the news and the TV, and there was a producer job, so I applied for it at the time. I thought random. And then it was the flood of 2008, big Mississippi flood. So they needed extra reporters, became a reporter. Long story short, I became the weekend weather anchor. No, I was not a meteorologist, did not have a degree. This is like market 172 to give people an idea. Yeah. Small market, Western Illinois. But this is where I met my future wife.
Oh, cool.
Right?
Yeah.
And I also gained some really cool skills. It's turned into a successful YouTube channel and all these different things. At the time, it seemed so random, but like how I write, how I'm able to edit and look through things, because I learned so many skills there that were so versatile at the time, seemed so random. But I believe in something bigger than myself. I don't believe in chance or coincidences. So having that belief system really started connecting the dots. And so long story short, what seemed random developed into a lot of like professional skills, things I still do to this day. I was able to write social media posts to this podcast, to books, to how I met my wife and where my life is now that I absolutely love. All started because I moved from Kentucky to help my parents out.
Yeah, right? Right. But you know what? Maybe that, like you say, that wasn't coincidence. I mean, maybe that was just the path. That was your path.
Right?
That was it. That was your path. I think for us, I have a lot of my friends who are having, like, they're younger. My friends are like 10 years younger, and then they have new families. And I tell them, I'm like, don't stress it. I'm like, talk to your children like adults. You don't have to yell and swear at them, but talk to them like adults. Because
if it happens, don't be so
yeah, don't feel bad about it. You little shithead. But, like, raise them and guide them a little bit, but don't steer them too hard. I'm like, and don't be in a hurry for it. So because I was in such a hurry when my kids are younger, because I was like extremely insecure having a 21 or a daughter at 21 years old, By the time she was 3, I wanted to move away because I didn't want people to know me. Because like you moved away because you wanted a different experience. I wanted to move away because I was like, this sucks. All her friends that are 3 are the second or third child. So then that parent has a nice job, a house, a new minivan. And I'm like this 21-year-old dad we're using welfare.
Yeah.
So it was very insecure. But I was like, obviously we can't move away and that's not the plan. We're not going to do that. And also I tell my friends, just be flexible. Like I thought for sure my path would be put her mother through school, then I would go to school. 3-4 years later, that wasn't the path. Yeah. And I'm very, very happy with it. So I'm sure you're very happy with being a weatherman. You know what I mean?
I was like, I was only making like $20,000.
Oh, it doesn't matter.
No, that's the thing. Like I didn't care about it. And, we have similar stories as far as that, like being on EBT to feed our firstborn daughter. And it sounds to me, and, so like the key to thriving is having challenges, right? Like, so
if it's easy,
so how do you thrive in those challenging situations? Like what advice would you give for those people that are struggling right now?
The same things over and over again, that it's number one is consistency. And then what are you consistent about? Paying attention to what's important and documenting. Now, when I say documenting, it sounds harsh and it sounds professional. It sounds officey, but documenting is just writing your thoughts in a private journal, revisiting those. Documenting is like setting a calendar to not just for work and time with your family, but maybe one of my friends who now has a child is like, dude, I want your schedule of events from 10 years ago. I'm like, what are you talking about? He goes, I'll never forget when we worked together, you had a thing and you call it like the Hallmark list, right? And so maybe my kids aren't getting Easter gifts like it's second Christmas, but what we're doing is we're going for a day hike. What we're doing in the fall is we're going to Bristol Mountain for a sky ride. It's 4 hours of the day, but it's something every month and it's just a couple hours. And it's something that we're not scheduling and talking about all day long to look forward to like it's this big event, but it happens, and it happens in consistency. So the consistency with work, with family, communication. And again, I'm a big believer in documenting because we can't possibly hold all that information in our head accurately.
Yeah, I love how you said documentation. I was writing that down for me because I just like the term. I mean, I write journal is what I call it, but I love documentation because it gets me to think at a bigger picture, like what should I be documenting right now? I mean, that's how we know about history, people just documenting stuff. So even personally, like how can you grow without documenting? And I realize like even with my journals and these things, it's a lot of personal stuff, but just even certain events. One of my favorites that I use though, I got this book, this little journal. It has 3 lines. But it's the 5-year journal or something like that. Basically, it's something. It's got a hardcover, so it can hopefully last 5 years. But the idea is
I love hardcover. You rarely find that.
Yeah, and I like the idea of it because it's like I'm writing on this line, and then every year for the next 5 years, I can look back and what I wrote on that road. So I'm actually already thinking 5 years ahead of what I want to read and be reminded of. I've been doing 2 things. One, I want to be that I know I got to be told. Probably even next year, or something I want to remember, like with the kids or a business thing. So I love that, but I'm going to apply it to other things and something consistency. I would agree, and I believe you use the words gifts along the gifts you're giving, and then you referred to like events, like hikes and stuff. Am I correct? Yeah. And that's such a great thing because it gets me think. We started doing that. I never used the word gifts. I love your terminology here, so I'm going to. Like you're borrowing Anthony's, I'm going to borrow yours, man.
Thank you, V. Thank you.
Because it's like I do these things with my kids because one, it was early on when we couldn't afford the presents, but I was realizing as soon as we buy them something at Christmas, it was so exciting, and then they destroy it in a week, and I'm like. And I was like, I did that when I was younger.
Ask my kids what they got for 5 Christmases in a row, or ask them what was their favorite fall event. They'll tell you like Old Forge. Right? That's the thing they remember.
Oh, yeah. My kids remember that. My son, his favorite story is probably the most traumatic, but now it's a laugh when we got stuck in a rainstorm at the top of a high peak.
Oh, yeah. You told me that at lunch.
Yeah, I told you that one. So, but I've said it on here like once, I think. But yeah, we got stuck. And so even in those bad, challenging moments where you might have screwed up, or not that I did in this moment, but like where it was stressful and you're thinking survival, no matter what it is, just remember there's a memory there and there's a learning experience there. And And I always consider using the term, while you can always be a teacher, which you definitely are, because we're seeing where you're doing that, but also always be a student, it sounds like, which is a theme in your life. You're always learning, growing, and then you're teaching those behind you within your company, your life, your kids, whatever.
Yeah, that line you're using there, teacher, student, and behind you. So everybody is super familiar with keep the 5 people around you, blah, 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 right? Okay, let me just say it in case you're not familiar. Typically in business or mentorship groups, it's you want to be near the 5 people who can help you be successful, right? Because you're going to learn from your mentors and your peers. I add it 2 different levels. So you've got 5 who are ahead of you, who you're going to learn from, right? So now you're a student. You got 5 around you who are your peers. I always say you should have 5 just below you. You're not looking down at them. You're lifting them up. So you got 5 other business owners or fathers or brothers or somebody who's just underneath you who needs that little bit of experience. And then people will say, wow, it's amazing. Like you'll talk to a group of 50 people and you'll take someone one-on-one for breakfast. I don't understand that that's amazing. I look at it like if I'm meeting somebody who's first, like brand new, green, right out of the eggshell, working with them on the basics in business and family early on is more exciting to me than taking somebody up the next level, because you get to start early and they're probably going to scale faster. But also when I have to revisit the things that are basic to me, it's a reminder, and I may not have been applying those sometimes. There are times when I'm like, yeah, we used to do that and that worked really well. Let's reapply that to our business. Somehow we grew over that and we missed it. So again, anybody listening, doesn't matter how long you've been in business or how successful you are, you got to revisit stuff. I mean, it is not a linear path. You've got to kind of loop back a few times and look at yourself and your business, look at your notes. And then when you meet with other people, like you said, you can be the student, you can be the peer, you can be the teacher.
I like that, because I was going to ask you at some point here, like what's something that maybe no one's ever heard? You already mentioned some, probably everyone, but it deserves repeating for sure, because we need reminders and we need to also look, who am I around? I love what you added there, though. There's the 5 ahead of you, with a lot of people do, 5 around you, which I still think we all need to evaluate. But 5 below, most people don't do that.
Yeah.
But I love that too, because I agree with the teaching aspect. That you become better at the skill or the information when you teach it. Like 5 different times is probably a good number. I would assume you become almost an expert in that field. Same thing, like I love human body. I love movement. I have since a very early age. I mean, I love just moving, climbing trees. I explore dance. I've done it all. And so there's always stuff out there. And so when I can find people open enough to teach it to, I become better at it too. So from a movement or whether it be a nutrition or whatever it might be. So same thing with that. I love that. So let's we've been talking about challenges, and what about in your career? We've talked about
overextending myself. I didn't even have to
already
think.
knew it before I finished that. It's like you knew what you said.
As soon as you say the word challenge, I had a whole bunch of like these images pop in my head. It's like the Matrix. It was horrible.
You're ready.
Yeah. Well, and the issue I have with telling the story is not turning people away from expanding what they can do. It just was too much for me. So for me personally, I had I had the cleaning restoration company. So I had on-the-spot cleaners hustling, rolling, making profits, assigning profits to real estate, buying. And I think at the time I had 33 rentals, a few warehouses. We had just bought and renovated an entire RV park. It was a little overwhelming. It was a little overwhelming, but man, it only took a year to get over that. I was like, okay, now we're on to next. So when I purchased the heating and cooling company, and again, a very good friend of mine, Jacques Lone, and I had a good vision for this business. And a year or so in, or quite honestly, 30 fucking days in, 30 days in.
Bleep.
That's how, this is the challenge. 30 days in, I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't see this coming. We grew, we took on work, and I'm not well-funded. I thought I was well-funded. We were owed $175,000 in 45 days because we were jamming out the big commercial work because we came in with all this value add to the company. But what I didn't do is pump the brakes a little bit and plan better. And that was a challenge. A challenge in itself of like, I might have to take cleaning company money, put it into this heating cooling company. It's not that it's wrong. It's not that the company's not making money. It's delays in payments. They call things called like retainage. You finish the project, but you don't get the full payment for another 90 to 120 days. Well, when you're a small business of 11 trucks and you went to 14 trucks in a year, now 18 trucks a year and a half down the road, you get a lot of bills. And the cash flow was tight. And so that was an extreme challenge. We worked it out. We figured it out. A lot of help from Jocelyn on that side. Just really being able to lead the men and to take on the challenges, even with the contracts and setting new rules and boundaries. Like, you're not going to wait 120 days to pay us. We're going to come do the work, but we want the payment here if you want us, because we offer this quality. But again, I just said it to you in 30 seconds. It was a year and a half of hell.
And you didn't do it alone, right?
No.
Yeah.
Gosh, no. And that's when I sat with my wife and kids and said, I'm stressed. It's not you. He and I sat down and said, we're stressed. It's not you, because it's a marriage. Business partnerships are marriages, and you got to have an open communication. And we had a very clear, and we voiced it, but we had a very good understanding. We're never mad at each other. We're just frustrated with the situation at hand. And we handled a lot together. And then he was able to buy me out year 3.5. The plan was 3 to 5 years. And at 3.5 years, I think we sat down one time and I'm like, you got this. You're killing it. If I stay here, it costs you too much. So I'm good, you're good, and we did a good deal, and he bought it out. I
love that too, and I love that story because it reminds me of somebody who I know personally who had a similar story and was doing a lot of it alone. They came out ahead, but it took a lot longer and a lot more stress from what it sounds like. I mean, so for those that are listening that might be dealing with something similar, take some notes.
So the challenge is there, and again, this is kind of it. So I sold that half, or my partnership out to him. I think it's like a year and a half, 2 years ago now. I don't have the date exactly because it's not. But the point there is, it took me till last month to have a clear understanding of the next topic I teach at my consulting groups or coaching classes is about mental health. Because it took me a year and a half away from that situation and that challenge to realize, we made it financially, but holy hell, I made it mentally. And that's obviously extremely important. The reason we were in foster care is our mother committed suicide. So for me, I was extremely protective of my mental health, but I can't just walk away and be like, hey, this is tough, I got to walk away. No, that's a financial issue. So, that challenge was challenging financially and emotionally.
Yeah. And thanks for sharing that because, that's a key to, we talked about the past, we talked about issues, and if you can talk about it, you're on to another step, but, going through your challenges, being vulnerable, talking about mental health, you're talking about coming to one of your, what do you call it? Like mastermind, like consulting group.
Yeah, we haven't even named it yet. It's brand new.
But I'm just trying to give people an idea what it sounds like it is. And I've been to plenty of these. Well, not plenty, but I've been to enough. And the reason why I even decided to write my book was mainly men and these women. Some women, or mainly men and some women, but it's this tough men, rah.
Chest thump.
Yeah, which is cool. It gets you riled up. But we need to understand that strength comes from our weaknesses and our challenges. And when we're down and we get back up, and at least that's for me. And it sounds like a lot from you is like, you knew there was no turning back. It's like burning the ship, right?
You burn the bridge, man.
Burn the bridge, burn the ship. And you're going to move forward and you're going to do good in this world. That's the story I'm hearing from you. And so talking about mental health is what I'm getting at. This is so important, but I believe so underutilized and so under talked about, especially from the man community, because it's looked as vulnerable as weak. Men shouldn't cry type thing.
And that in itself, the vulnerable and being weak, us, my wife and I, my children and I, David from the heating company and I, having open conversations and understanding that there's an emotional, mental stress attached to the financial stress allows you to work through these problems a little better. And then also, I'm telling you, it builds the strongest bonds. Like my wife and I have a great bond. My kids and I, we can mind read each other. David and I, Anthony and I, I'm very fortunate with some amazing people that I have around my life. My sons and I were skiing in Lake Placid for their school trip in February. Jocelyn gives me a call. We're talking business. Get off the phone. Hey, love you too. Hang up. And my sons looked at me and they're like, "You guys say you love you?" I was like, "Yeah, I love that guy." They're like, "Oh, okay."
There's different kinds, right?
Yeah,
I love my kid and my wife.
But in their mind, it's not going to be strange to them to feel like a good bond with a friend or a business owner and not be like, "Oh, we can't talk like that. That's weird." No, it's not weird. I love that guy. I want him successful. He wants me successful.
When emotion is attached, it talks about it in Think and Grow Rich. When you attach emotion, right? Yeah. We talked about it, but people don't understand. I think people skip over that part because I know some people that read it, but have trouble with emotion, have trouble expressing it, showing it, hugging. Like that's a key point of that book, let alone, believing affirmations, all this. When emotion, that's passion. When you're passionate about something, there's a higher likelihood of success in that area.
I'm going to tie two things together. Only because you said it and I wouldn't have remembered. Documenting and then revisiting. So I was always a fan of writing notes in the side of these books. And somehow I knew I was talking to myself future, and I'd look back and I'd say, that's what I thought. How did it work? Kind of grade myself. And then what I've said now is I tell people, I'm like, have you ever reread a book and read it differently?
That book actually says you should read it 3 times.
Thank you. So I
but
reread
how
books.
many of us have, right?
Well, and there's How to Win Friends and Influence People. I've read that a couple of times. The notes that I wrote in those books, I actually love. I'm like, oh, that's where my mind was. Did it lead me down the right path? Yes, no, maybe so. But it's great that I documented something because now I get to remember how I thought then, and I'm looking at it differently now, and it's exciting. You know what I mean? So just documenting that in the books as you're reading books. People always I love podcasts, don't get me wrong, but people are like, oh, well, what audio book is that? I'm like, well, you're going to miss out. You can highlight.
Love flipping pages.
You can highlight, you can jot notes. And then you should go back and look at those later. So revisiting is another very important topic.
You're not knocking. I record podcasts because I know some people don't read. I want to provide free content for people to be able to absorb and grow and just help people, right?
Yep.
And so the same thing, I listen to podcasts. I love reading books. I would say, I have, I don't know, probably 300 books on my bookshelf, but they're not all personal development, but I would say if you've got at least 5 to 10 personal development, I'm going to limb here. You got enough. Go back and read them. And
I think our Spurling Group website, we have a list of books that are based on business, thought, and stuff like that. So it's like a list of 5 to 7 books in each category. Just because people ask, oh, what books do you like? Go to my website, take a look. It's not the final list, but it's a pretty good list and it'll get you started and then go from your thought process. You know?
People are always asking for books and which is the best book for this, just any of them, right? And just actually, it's not just reading them, it's retaining it and using it,
It's the action of finding a book and sitting down first, because that tells me you're willing to learn, you know?
I've heard so many people say, oh, I can't read. Well, if you continue to tell that story, I'm a guy with ADHD, supposedly. I was diagnosed, but I just ignore that, or I look at that title as a superpower, not as a limitation, right?
Yeah.
And we've talked about that in lunch. We talk about, how you quit looking at the cards you were given, the life that you're in. It is what it is. How can you utilize it as a superpower or a tool?
Tools,
right?
All day long. Yep.
I've had a number of concussions. I've cut my head open. I've torn, broken, ripped apart
Stay away from
head to toe.
Stay away from me. Everybody listening, stay away from me.
I'm an adventurer and I set no limits. But here's the thing. I've always come back. I've come back stronger. And my business is around, literally from that. Everybody that I've worked with, I've been through some of that and I've never set a limit. So I can train these people just back to teaching. Yep. I taught myself and then I've taught others, torn rotator cuff. Yep. I've broken my neck twice. I've had 9 staples in the right side of my head from a bad car wreck. And people think I'm exaggerating, but I'm not. And I don't share this to brag. I know people have been through worse. The point of it is, everybody, you were born with 2 legs. We hear a story of people that are born deaf and mute and the amazing thing that they're doing. So,
oddly enough, is that my parents are deaf. They were deaf, right?
Yeah.
And my mother was valedictorian of her school and gave a verbal speech everybody could hear. She never heard anything. She just knew they worked on it and she figured it out. Now, unfortunately, I never got to really see her because she, had passed away when we were so young. But it's a story that we were told over and over. And you don't know that those stories kind of changes and influence 30, 40 years down the road, right? You're like, oh, they were able to be successful in their own way against those kind of, challenges and stuff.
Yeah. So. We just, it sucks, I could say, for example, when I wrote my book, I had so many people come up to me like, oh man, I'm so sorry. I was like, I'm not right. I was in my feelings and emotions for a minute, but I knew if I stayed there, that person won. That person still controlled me. My babysitter or whatever was doing those things when I was 5, 6, 7, that they still had the reins on. And I had this very, I don't know where it came from. When people ask, well, where'd that come from? I just decided one day that I wanted to make an impact, and anything that was going to get in my way or limit me, I wanted out of it. Yep. So I needed to address it. How long
into your independent career, I would say, or independent self, right? It's probably even better. So how long into your independent self were you able to communicate that versus like, I know for me personally, the first 10, 15 years of my, 10 years of my business, I didn't discuss my past. I'm like, oh, I'm just working, just being successful. And then later I realized, I'm like, you know what? I am a human being and that stuff's tough.
It's a good question. Well, I would say age 12 is when I realized I was independent. You mentioned that.
Right.
I realized, no offense to my parents, they were working like 6 jobs and I never saw them. They were just basically there. Me and my other brother joke about, they were just there to keep us from dying. I learned, that's where I learned how to cook. That's when I made the testament is like, my parents are always broke, but making all this money. I'm so confused at age 12. What is going on here? And so that's where I learned how to cook.
Yeah.
I loved, I was tired of like the frozen meals in the freezer.
Salisbury steaks, man.
So like, that's where I became a good cook and fell in love with restaurants, and then which also developed a good skill. I'm the main cook in our house and I'm so efficient at it, but I developed all those skills at 12, and then, you talk about that. So I actually helped formulate a group in college. I want to say it was around my sophomore, junior year that was called HEAT, and the acronym stood for Health Education Advocate Team. So I went around and personally shared my story in front of a bunch of strangers, where we talked about like healthy relationships, sexual assault, rape, these types of things in front of college campuses, high school campuses, and then just more the relationship aspect of younger kids. This is all through the state of Kentucky, and I helped develop that. And so I was just passionate about this, and I was the only man in this group. It was all women. And I didn't realize it then, but I started to realize, I get passionate about this because it's like, it's just your story.
That's it.
Like, it's a part of it. And if it's going to help another person, but when we hold these things in, we're holding back key information that could help the next generation. We can't prevent everything. I wish I could prevent every horrible, evil, devilish thing happening.
Yep.
But I learned and grew from that, and I am doing a disservice. To see how I get passionate, I am doing a disservice if I don't share my story and how I overcame it.
Yep.
How I've used it and how it, I went through a series of like, working out till pain because I suffered so much pain, but that developed into my career. And I saw, so there's, very early and then just to a point where this is just it,
That's it.
So,
dude. I know. I remember, I think my first, wife and I are obviously divorced, and, I went to counseling. Like I didn't want to.
Yeah.
I don't know why I did, but I just told the guy, and I rattled down in like 15 minutes my life story. He's like, whoa. And I was like, what? And I'm like, this is just a story I tell. I'm used to this story. Like it was from age 11 months old till today, right? What do you want me to do? And then he actually helped me break it down quite a bit and then understand a lot of how those experiences kind of develop us later on. But I used to use that phrase. It's a story I tell. Now it is a story I tell, but I use it differently in a sense of like mentorship, guidance, and relatability. Like, it's nothing is easy.
Yeah. Like I just wrote an article for Forbes Business Council about that, like how childhood trauma can negatively affect you professionally or positively impact others and yourself in your career. And it was published and I was excited about it because it was a long haul, but there are tools that could be there. And I realized by addressing it, but I'll give you this too. When I wrote my first book and I had to read it multiple times, the first time during the very detailed information that I gave about some of my childhood trauma, I had to pause. And I got, even though I've said it to people, but I realized I never went into the detail that I did in my book. And then the visuals came into my head. I had to put it down, and then I had to go through. I was like a bubbling baby for a little bit, collected myself, and I said, I'll pick it up tomorrow. Meditated, went to bed, picked it up the next day, went back to the beginning of that chapter, read it through as if it was any other book.
Isn't that weird? It's so weird.
I wanted to share that because look at how, when you address it at that level, I'm not telling everybody again, I say this over and over again, you don't have to write a book, but you talked about writing, documentation, read it over. That first time, maybe your second, I don't know, everyone's different, but once you can read through it to a point, and then once you can read it out loud, and once you can say it in front of the people, again, you don't have to do these things, but just know that's going to help you. And it's limiting you with your kids or your wife. Like, especially if you've dealt with sexual trauma, if you don't actually work as many layers and levels through it, you are limiting your impact on this world, but also to the people closest to you.
Yeah. That's a great point. I think that like recently, this last Veterans Day, I wrote a different post for Veterans Day, right? Because everybody wants to thank a veteran. And believe me, I want to thank them. We want to be thanked. That wasn't the purpose of my post. My post said why it makes me uncomfortable to be thanked. And then I wrote in detail, like, I didn't join the army to jump on grenades and save America. Like, I was a kid running away.
Yeah, you said
right?
that, yeah.
And this is the thought that I've had since the day I joined at 17. Here I am at 46, fucking crying my eyes out in our bedroom writing this. And my wife is like, just next to me, like, let it in. She knew how I felt. So she's just letting me let it out. And then what I am going to do from now on is repost that, because the number of private conversations I receive from grown men who are like, I was raised in foster care. I was beaten by my father, babysitter, XYZ. Dude, man, yeah. I became, I had this spot in space for a couple of weeks where I was like, I'm glad you're telling me. I'm glad you're talking about it. And from that on, I don't care if anybody ever thanks me for being a veteran. I don't feel like that because, again, I just did it to get away. But the story opened up the conversations that I want to hear every year, because a lot of guys don't know. No one just calls you and say, hey, man, how you feeling? Well, honestly, like it doesn't do that, right? You're like, hey, I'm good. It's rare that on a quick phone call, somebody's going to dive in and be like, you know what?
I'm that weird guy. I raise my hand. You ask me how I'm doing. I'm going to tell you how I'm doing, man.
Well, I don't mind that. But to give you an example, anybody listening knows that if you had something traumatic in your life, and there's something that triggers it every time. For me specifically is running a red light, just under the yellow light to the red light. There's a reason for that for me. Right after that is a lot of childhood trauma for us. And so anytime that I cut a red light just where it's yellow to red, boom, for about 30 seconds, I'm in my own head. I can usually work it out and keep driving. Sometimes I got to pull over because that's it, right?
Yeah, that's interesting. Triggers, and sometimes you don't even know. It could be a smell, could be a carpet,
the noise, could be anything. Right,
it could be something, and it's just interesting. And I've had those kinds of things happen to me, and just cooking a meal.
Yeah.
And it's like,
yeah. Lately it's been the 80s music. It's getting me bad, but I love it. But I know we're going to wrap up soon. But my point is in your book writing and in my Facebook posts and any conversations I have it feels good to me to voice some of my history and express my feelings. And it's great. And I tell people all the time, if you have a little something that you want to talk, just call me, text me, message me, open up. And you get no judgment from me, man. You can call me and be like, this is how my childhood was, or my adulthood is, or how my whatever.
That's so good you shared that, because so many people seem untouchable. And even with the coaching space, especially in mine and the health and wellness, there's so many people just popping up that have never even ran a thing. And then all of a sudden they're professionals and how to scale and grow. And so, we could probably spend a whole nother podcast of how to vet out quality coaches.
Give me a year of coaching. We'll have another pack. We'll have another class.
Yeah. So 2 more questions, maybe 3, but definitely a couple more. What is the most meaningful thing going on right now? Real quick, whether it be work or what you're working on to prioritize.
Well, I just go with the first thing that pops in my head because that's usually the truest answer. The most meaningful thing for me is we spent most of the winter in Florida, and we brought home our dog because he was down with my wife in Florida, and so we drove him home, and we checked his arthritis. It turned out to be bone cancer. So we're not having surgery for him. We're going to wait him out a little bit here and then make a decision. But the most meaningful thing to me is that in my mind, he was a dog. In my mind, he would probably live till my son graduated, which, as cold as this sounds, I'm going to be honest. My son graduates, moves on, our dog passes away, we're free, we go travel more.
Yeah, you're limited by kids.
That was my mind 2.5 years from now. When we found out he had bone cancer, I cried like a little girl. I'm like, what in the hell? I didn't know I had so much emotion for him because I love him. He's a good dog.
The
but
memories
I just never
are attached to it too. Probably camping or whatever, right?
Well, he's a big giant Rottweiler, so he doesn't camp. But but it really hit me. And my wife has said to me, she goes, I didn't think it would hit you. I'm like, I didn't either. And telling my sons and sitting down. So the most meaningful thing for us right now is to just spend the time with him, give him some extra love, and have our kids see that this is part of life and walk them through these emotions so it's not super impactful, but it affects them, but it doesn't negatively affect them.
Well, I'm glad you allowed that emotion to come. I had something similar where my son was playing with a kid who was diagnosed with autism, and I I knew, but my kid plays with anybody. So it didn't really do anything. But his mother came up to me after they were playing for like an hour, and she says to me, he's never been like that, or he's rarely like that. And
in a good way.
Can they get together again sometime? Because he's never been so open, so communicative, so energized, smiling. And, you know, at the time, it didn't really get me emotion. I just thought it was great. But then when I told my son, I love that. And he's like, what are you talking about? Yeah, and I explained to him. And then I am so damn proud of you. And then emotions. And I just let the emotions happen in front of him. Before, not so much, because I grew up in a house where my dad or these people would hold it back. So I'm glad you have that. And I would say encourage that, because they need to see that and know that it's okay, right?
Yep.
One more. And, you know, looking back on your journey, what is the most meaningful lesson you have learned about overcoming challenges and striving towards success and striving every day?
Oh, man, there's a lot. You just did a lot in there.
Looking back, okay, most meaningful lesson there.
This is like when you're taking tests in school. Can you read this out loud again?
I can say, yeah.
No. I'm going to go for it. I think the most meaningful thing in business is that I use this phrase, and I know you can bleep it out all you want, but you don't let today fuck up your tomorrow. And for a long time when I was stressed, I would either stress 2 or 3 days in advance of a difficult conversation or a follow-up. Maybe we did something wrong on a job. And what I found is that things are not that difficult. Communication, address it, fix it. I mean, if you can't fix it, you can't. There's always some way to fix it, right? But I would say the most meaningful thing is learning that it's not that bad. Whatever it is, it's not that bad. You can fix it. I've had guys, total vans. First thing I say to them, are you okay? Right? They're a business owner. As a business owner, they would expect, oh my God, the van is down. You know how much that brings us in a day? I don't care. I do care, but I don't care. Very first question I ask, are you okay? The reason I remember that is because the technician has brought it up. He's been with me 10 years now. He's brought it up. He's like, that meant a lot. I was rattled. I was already nervous that I crashed, slid off the road in the snow and damaged the van. And I was mad. I was upset that you were going to be mad, and you weren't. I'm like, well, you're a person. You're a human being, dude. So it wasn't that. I probably wasn't that way in the beginning, but I have been that way in the last 15 years. And I think that's probably the most meaningful thing is just knowing that the bad days they're not forever, and they're just little hiccups, as sour as they taste the minute you get the news. I mean, I had a technician literally this week just make a very small accidental mistake on a job that is expensive, and we are fixing it. And the first thing he says is like, I can't believe I did this. I understand if you have to let me go. I'm like, stop that conversation, because that's not the case.
I love that he owned up, though.
Yeah, he was like, I don't want to make this phone call. I was like, I don't want to take it. I already know. What? You know what I mean? But I'm like, let's stop that conversation. That's not how we think. I understand you're rattled, right? Like, just let's dial it down. Anybody hurt? No. Did you drive over a dog? No. I backed into her Lexus. Okay. That sucks. It's fixable. You know what I mean? Like,
I have insurance.
No, you know what? That's a whole nother podcast, because you don't want to put it on your insurance. I just pay it out of pocket, right? Sometimes when you're the size that we are or bigger,
that's you
just pay for it, man. It sucks, but we're just going to pay for it out of pocket, because the increase in policies times 11 vehicles, it's ridiculous, dude.
That makes sense now. I didn't think that through.
Yeah, we self-insure a lot up front.
No, but you made a good point that a philosophy I found for pay for it so you can get it out of your mind. Whatever that might pay for it is. If it's a rent or whatever,
I know that was the last question. I have to say this. I tell people, and you're listening, and you're like, oh, that's a great answer. But let's be serious. That answer is only 4 days after some clarity, right? Because in the day that he hit the Lexus, my response to him was, are you okay? Did we kill a dog? Did we hit a lady? No, we're good. You're fine. You're not getting fired. We're going to work this out. Obviously, we just have to be more cautious. You already know that. I'm not your mom and dad who tell you the obvious. Nobody likes that, right? He knows. He feels bad. Hang up the phone. Who do I text? My 2 very good friends, David Jacqueline, Anthony Valerio. And I said, just sometimes, I'm tired of having all the money for all the answers. Because you gotta pay your way through this hiccup. And they're just like, you hit me in the feels today, man. Because all 3 of us had something within a couple day period that, I say you don't budget for, but you better. If you're going to be in business more than one person, you had better budget for some hiccups. And it is sometimes tough to even put on the strong face, but you have to, as a leader and an owner and a mentor, you have to be strong up front, and you can be privately sit down a little bit and cry. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man. With people like yourself, I don't always ask this type of question, but I always like to hear the response. And it's like this unicorn.
I feel like I'm going to get a wrong answer on this test.
No, the cool thing is there is no wrong answer.
Yeah, that's right.
It's like the unicorn-sized rainbow, fairyland. Use your imagination, create whatever you like. But if you could snap your fingers, what's one thing you would do, or what's one thing that you'd like to happen today?
That's an image that didn't pop in for an answer. Everything you've asked me, the image popped in for the answer. I don't have the one for today. I'm going to tell you probably because I feel like we're living it. Like people say, oh, all the good you do is going to come back. No, bitch. That's something I already got it front loaded and it's my turn to give it back. You know what I mean? So it's sour or not sour. That's the wrong phrase. As weird as it sounds, there's nothing I have on my horizon that would be a daydream for me to grab. I mean, we are living it. I love it. We're having a great time with it. Just last week, I had a huge compliment. I sat down with the charity who we donate a lot to, but not only do we just donate, we inspire other people to donate. So I'll run videos and post and tag them, or I'll do donation matches just to try to get people to donate with them. So sitting down at the coffee, and like I said to you when I sat down here, I didn't read my notes because I want to see right away. I want to fire off the answer. Yeah. So apparently in the notes there was some information I should have known.
No, the reason.
No. Yeah. In this charity meetup. So at the charity meetup, I thought we were just going to sit down and they're going to say, here's the schedule of donations we need this year. And instead what they did was they asked me to sit on their board of directors because they want somebody that has a business mindset to help them grow their charity. And I was like, yes. I will help you do that in a heartbeat.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
No, the reason why I ask that sometimes is because I feel I imagine most people are always on the go and they don't stop to think or dream like children. Mm-hmm. They don't imagine. They're not playful. This is how I feel just because of the people I encounter. So that question is definitely for you, but it's also for the listeners. If you have time to listen to this, you have time to open up your imagination, because that's where like dreams come true. That's where business ideas, that's where Henry Ford, all these greats. But whether it be a professional money-making thing, it's also just where you feel good. It's where it's fun. And you mentioned earlier, life is so short and days go by so fast. You want to be able to, at the end of the day, somebody asks you, what'd you do today? How'd your day go? And you want to say the good things, right? It went great, or you made an impact, or whatever. There was stress, but I learned from it. But did you take time to just imagine? Did you take time to be playful? You see kids and I hear energy is wasted on the children. I see people envious, but you can have that as an adult. You're having the time of your life.
Bro,
you're smiling.
It's unbelievable.
I'm having the time of my life, and people think we're anomalies, you know?
Right.
But it doesn't mean we don't have stress. It doesn't mean we don't have challenges. Yeah. It's just we navigate in, around, and through and use it to a point. So that's for today's episode of Strive 365. I appreciate everyone listening. I know you found value. I'm going to stop saying if you found value. I know you found value, and I know you know at least one person that will find value in this. So please share, subscribe, comment, do all the things that you know how to do, because it's not for me. I don't profit off this, but you guys profit in your minds and your hearts from this. And so make sure you give it out to the world. And if you want to contact this guy, don't worry, show notes. We've got it there, every way to get a hold of him, because he said, reach out to him. So thanks again for tuning in another episode of Strive 365.